standing up is for more than 15 minutes is hard for me. So I'll tell you one thing about getting older. It's harder to stand up. But let me just tell you that just a few things so you and I had just gotten a master's degree at the University of Chicago, and I thought that while being a mother was fascinating and wonderful, and my volunteer life was interesting, and it was at the beginning of the civil rights movement, and all kinds of interesting things were going on in my neighborhood in Chicago. But I thought somehow that I should help the family's income, and I should bring a little money home. So I thought I would substitute teach in Chicago South Side schools, anything between K and 8. And I thought that would be easy because I got along with young people, and I was doing interesting things with my life, and I thought, well, what's the big deal about that? And some of you know, substitute teachers are not, it's one of the least pleasant jobs in America is substituting because a teacher is sick. You have very little power, they know more about what's going on with the kids than you do. They have all the tricks up their sleeve, and they're waiting for some ignorant, naive person like you to walk in the room and they can amuse themselves with you for an hour. And but I stuck it out because I was interested. I got fascinated by the schools, not from the viewpoint of the teacher, but as a political activist and a civil rights activist. I was intrigued by what went on in the schools for so many years as a preparation for a strong democratic life. There seemed to be a contradiction between the way we ran schools and the kind of political life that I wanted every citizen to participate in. And I thought, well, what an odd idea that we set these schools up for sort of the opposite purpose. But in any case, it was just interesting. So then I was offered a job across the street from my house in an elementary school as a morning kindergarten teacher. And then, to my surprise, I found being a teacher more fascinating, more engrossing, more intellectually stimulating than all the years of schooling put together. I had more questions. I woke up every morning more eager to get there and try to figure out something than I had ever felt before. And but I still assumed that when the kids got a little older, I would do something serious, teach little children, because I still held deeply in me some kind of conviction that teaching little children wasn't a woman, in a negative sense, a woman's task, and that I would not be, after all this good education I had, I really should do something more important. And all I can tell you is the next 35, 45 years of my life were spent in schools, and I wouldn't trade anything for it. They were extraordinary years, and now that I'm retired for the second time, I miss it. I miss it every day. I haven't got the kind of energy or physical flexibility, I think, to be so good at it, or just survive it, put it that way. But I miss it. I miss my colleagues. I miss the daily humor of school life, the funny stories, the sad stories, the range of people that you build community with, from parents, staff, custodians, colleagues, and children of all types and ages. And so these last 40 years working in Central and East Harlem, and then the last 10 years working in a part of Boston called Roxbury, mostly working in schools that I had something to do with creating in the public school sector. So if you're in the least bit interested in either being a parent of children who go to school or being one of those teachers in schools, I certainly would love to provoke you a little and both encourage you and maybe discourage you if it's really not what you should do. So ask me questions, please. And my friend here said they may be, I just can't believe it, they may be not ready to ask questions because of all the terrible things that schools have done to them. So I want you to prove her wrong and start putting up your hands. Hi there. You have a question? You have somebody primed to ask a question? Yes? Well, you know, it's almost teaching in Harlem and East Harlem and in the south side of Chicago means what I really should ask me is what's not teaching? What's teaching in the suburbs like? Or what's teaching in a predominantly middle class or white community like? Because that I don't know, you know what I mean? So therefore I don't even know how to pose those questions. This was just what teaching is like. I tend to think that the same underlying principles of education work for all children. And that teaching, if I had been teaching in Easton, or it wouldn't have been no different. Now, when I say no different, I just mean no different at the bottom line. But of course, there are tons of things special. One is, people would say to me, aren't you afraid to go there? And I spent about 30 of those years in Central and East Harlem, and I never had any reason to be afraid. Is that just luck? No, but the only time I was ever held up in New York was right at my block on 77th Street, because I got too absorbed in reading the New York Times Sunday section and didn't notice this character creeping up on me. But never in Harlem or East Harlem. So that was interesting to me to realize how our visions of what things must be like and how different they can be. And not only that, there were a few times that I would be running around in Harlem because some child had dashed away and I was dashing after him, and which people would come out of the store and laugh, and I thought, they're laughing both because it's funny to watch it, but also because maybe I'm a white lady. So, and I enjoyed being that too. And I found that fascinating. What did my being a white lady, how did that change the situation? How did that make parents see me? How did that make kids see me? When were kids saying some things to me that were their translation of things their parents were saying? And this was a period in New York City, for example, when there was enormous racial unrest. Enormous. School strikes, black against white. My own children were in a school which was predominantly African American, and there were tensions they were going through. And I had another way of getting into that and looking at it. And I both appreciated how tough kids sometimes had to be growing up in these settings, but that they were not necessarily much different than my own children growing up in the same world. Is that an answer? You want to push it, you can. And there's another hand way back there. What was that? Oh, you know, the lady from the flyer asked me the same thing, and I don't know how to answer something like that. Honestly, I don't. Because it sounds ridiculous to say that every day was memorable. Now, I have, as you'll discover if you come to hear me tonight, there are certain anecdotes that I have picked out of that are good anecdotes for opening up subjects, but they weren't necessarily the most memorable. But I'll tell you one, and if you come tonight, you'll have already heard it. I'm sitting with the kids, and we're it's right after, or around the time the first man went to the moon. We haven't been back lately, have we? But in any case, and we were talking about it. And I'm reading some little book about man going to the moon, and it says when he got up to the moon, he looked down and saw the Earth. No, pardon me, he didn't look down. He looked up and saw the Earth. And I thought, I read it, and then I thought, well, that's a misprint. He would look down to see the Earth. Well, the Earth, the moon's up there, and we're down here. And I stopped and said, does that make sense that he would look up to see the moon, to see the Earth? And the kids started standing up and looking down and looking up and trying. And then some kids said, well, if he looked down the way you think, he would see his feet. And it was suddenly, it opened up the whole issue for me of up and down. I mean, it was like this kid's statement. Not that I didn't really know that up and down is not the same as east and west and so forth, or north and south, but it was just an eye-opener to me. And it stayed with me. And I went around saying things to people like, if you're in the moon and you want to see the Earth, what do you do, look up or down? And I was pleased to say that I wasn't the only stupid person. And a lot of people said, well, you look down, of course. And it just thought how language shapes so many ways in which we misthink, misunderstand the world. So it's not that those don't happen all the time to us, and we don't have to be in schools to have those experiences. But when you're in school, it's hard to, and that's why I'm saying it's hard to find a memorable moment, because that happens so often that I leave school intellectually excited about something I had never known was an interesting subject. I had always thought math was one of the boring subjects. I was fairly good at math, but fairly good really at being obedient about math. You know, I followed the rules and I was smart enough, so I did all right. And in my junior year of high school, which was the last year you had to take math in high school, I realized, though, that there was a half a dozen kids in that class who were experiencing something totally different than me. They were in a different world, even though they weren't getting more right answers than I was, but they were in a different world of math. But I forgot about that. And when I started teaching and talking to kids about why they thought, you know, just they're counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and not 1, 2. In other words, that they had learned this counting rhyme, and they were told they were supposed to touch these objects while they count. So they did the two of them together, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and they didn't make any connection between the objects they were looking at, pointing to, and the numbers they were saying aloud. And it made me think about, you know, what do numbers mean to kids when we teach them these numbers? What do they think it means, and what does it mean? What does 3 mean? What is the threeness about it? After all, 3 chairs are really not at all the same amount as 3 shoes. Why can we call them both by the name 3? And how did I learn that? And when did I learn that? And did someone tell me that? And so I tried telling the kids that. That didn't seem to help. I said, each time you say a number, point to just one thing. Well, they could do that, but it didn't seem to have any effect on for some kids, on their idea of what threeness was. If I say take 3, they took the third one then, not the 3 of them. Anyway, I realized that this was an incredible, that numbers and mathematics was an amazing human invention. And getting the right answer was not the only thing at stake. And I began to read books about mathematics. I started with books about mathematics meant for about 4th graders. That was the great discovery I made. Go back to 3rd or 4th grade. That's about where you are on most subjects. I was a historian by training. But that in science and mathematics, I was more or less somewhere between 3rd and 4th grade. And then, to some degree, still 3 months old. And you should go back to the stuff there and then move forward. And I got interested in so many other parts of the world. So I also thought, of course, it's too bad the kids aren't always as interested in what I'm excited about, as that I'm more excited sometimes about things than they are, and that part of the purpose of school is the other way around, to get them at least as excited as I, if not more so, and that was a craft to learn how to do that. Discovering this for myself was not enough, and learning how to produce a classroom in which children were as engaged as I was going to take me years to become good at. I can't even remember where that question started. Yeah. Now, you see, I'm terrible at remembering names. 5 of us just had lunch together, and Patricia, Douglas, and I have a hard time. So while small schools helped me, I still had a hard time. It isn't enormously helpful if you remember people's names. Enormously is teaching. There's nothing. It's enormously different to call down the hall and say, John, stop for a minute, I want to talk to you, than say, hey, stop for a minute. It's just magic. And so people who are good at finding a way to remember names, do that fast, because it's, meanwhile, you can wear names, but the kids can see that you're going, oh, hi there, Sarah. And I know how much it matters to me when people call me by my name. So it's funny you should ask that. I think that's very important. The other thing is you should come in prepared, over-prepared, which doesn't mean that you're going to use 2/3 of what you've prepared for, but it means you have a repertoire so that if something is a complete flop, you have somewhere else to go with it. And that you have the materials so that you're not then stopping and saying, oh, where is this and where is that, so that you, and since subs always teach different kids, or usually teach a different group of kids, if you have a few tricks, like under 3rd grade, I had a bunch of stories that my own children loved to hear me tell. And that was, I could waste half an hour telling them a great story, and then they could invent stories, so that there are certain kinds of things that almost always work, but for different people. I love telling stories. My son likes to read stories, but he doesn't like to make them up. And I personally think made-up stories are he teaches too. The made-up stories are one of the wonderful things we can help children learn to do, is to make up stories. It's the beginning of human history was oral storytelling. And so I think it almost always works if you get to be comfortable with it. And the other thing is, if things get too bad, leave. Because as I once discovered, once children discover that you have nothing to back you up, that there's nothing behind you, some would say, sometimes they get overexcited by the extent of their power to destroy you. And that things will calm down if you leave the room and find some other wise person to replace you. That only happened to me twice, but it did happen twice in that year of subbing, that I went downstairs and said, I think the kids would be safer if I'm not in the room. And somebody, though, probably should be. They didn't call me back to those schools, which was fine. Yes, way over there. But let me tell you something that's interesting. They never have from schools. Schools have always been terrible. In fact, they were probably at one point worse, but kids spend much less time in school. And that was a great discovery. I mean, when I realized that up until recent times, kids didn't spend a lot of time in school. You know, if you read Little House on the Prairie, you can be reminded of how early kids dropped out of school. And certainly most kids dropped out before they even got to what we would call sixth or seventh grade, and some of them spent most of that time in second grade. And they weren't preparing for high school. They weren't being judged on anything that was really significant to their parents, who expected them to go into their trade or farm or whatever. So that schools didn't have a big impact. They were not the center of people's sense of who they were and whether they were valued and so forth. And then, even in terms of democracy or civic life, children learned a lot about civic life through their everyday life spent out of school. They knew their neighbors. They knew the fights going on in the neighborhoods about, well, we should build this or we should build that. The civic life was fairly local. And the only big reason for learning to read was to read the Sears and Roebuck catalog. I'm exaggerating. The other is to read the Bible, but you could memorize that. And so that we are confronted with, I think, the dangerous and threatening fact that young people today are incarcerated, and I use that word deliberately, inside, that is, their freedom is taken away for a minimum of 12 years, and if they want a decent job, we're now told that they need to spend 16 years in an institution not of their making, not of their particular necessary interest, but because it's an obstacle that you have to overcome to go on with your life. And I think, therefore, schools have a much greater impact on the young, both in sorting them and ranking them, and in teaching them civic habits. They're not adults till they're 20, so I guess most of you are adults now, but you're still in school. It's a new ball game, and I think it's a game designed almost down to the smallest detail to make us bad citizens. Not even our teachers are respected enough to have a voice and say in the one area they're most expert in. And increasingly, they are disempowered adults whose only power is that they're probably superior to the kids they teach in knowledge. It's a petty superiority. Why would you want to grow up and to be like the teachers? You have more freedom when you're young than when you get to be a grown-up. That used to be the opposite, is what I'm saying. Think of the way we measure people now, or whether they get the right answer out of 4 or 5. And what in the world is that teaching you? That there's always right answers, that you don't even know who decided that was the right answer. You can never confront the person who decided it was the right answer. And no one is interested in your reason for thinking it's the wrong answer. But that's the basis on which important decisions are going to be made about you and increasingly about your teacher. Those are anti-democratic habits. And I think there's a crisis in America, not an employment crisis. There's a crisis that we haven't created a society which has enough decent jobs for everybody. And that's a crisis of intelligence and creativity and being able to think outside the box. And none of which, it seems to me, is what we're asking schools to produce children who will fit inside certain boxes. And there just happen not to be enough boxes. So a lot of people are left out, unemployed. I can't remember what your question was, and I'm feeling I went way astray. But you can pursue a question, or someone else can ask a different one. Yes, on the aisle. Pardon me? That in the schools, yes. And, well, I think kids couldn't bear to leave our place. I'm serious. Now, and not only because that's where their friends are. Keep in mind, I think the main reason kids come back to school every day, I used to amaze me when I think of what life was like for them in school, was that's where their friends are. Now, when kids get to about 15, 16, 17, well, maybe a lot of their friends are not in school, so they begin to weigh, where should I be out there with them or should I be in here with them? And, but I think the kids in our schools were as interested and intrigued by coming to school as I was, that they found the adults in the school people they found interesting. Let me just tell you a little story about I'm visiting a school in California, and it's a school run by a friend of mine, much similar to my own school, but it was in its second year, and they wanted me to look at it and see what I thought. And when the day was over, they got together and we sat and chat, and one of the teachers said, you know, I'm getting so annoyed. There's a big room where all the teachers have their desks and cubbies and books. Said, you know, the kids walk in the one door and look at us and then walk out the next door. This is not a hallway, this is our workspace. We should close one of those doors so they can't do that. And there's a perfectly nice teacher saying this. You may already suspect what I'm going to say. And I said, isn't that amazing, though? What a tribute to you guys, that they want to know what you're doing when they're not in class. These are adolescent kids who are curious about their teachers. They got only 3 or 4 minutes. They could be talking to their friends. And that, I want us to be part of the same world, the young people and the adults. And when you create a community in which the ties between all its partners are as strong as they were for us, it's not hard to help them graduate. Now, to have them want to graduate. Now, the other part of it is how to help them be competent enough to give them that diploma. And that takes, again, that takes years of learning to be very good at your work. And it takes being in a climate and school where there are more experienced teachers who can help you out, and where even the kids can help you out. And that's, if you have a school culture of that sort, it's hard for teachers to leave. You know that Mission Hill School, for example, the only reason people leave is one left because she got twins, and she was tried for a year to bring the twins to school because she didn't want to ever leave the school. And I saw her the other day, but she finally decided she couldn't bring the twins to school every day, even though I was perfectly willing. And they may be exhausted, but they're not burnt out. In this kind of community, neither parents nor neither teachers nor children get burnt out. And I use that very carefully, and I want you to think about it. How we got to thinking about people burning out, which is a phrase that was invented for appliances. And if we're treated like mechanical appliances, indeed we may burn out. But if we're treated and treat others like human beings, we get sometimes discouraged and sometimes exhausted. But the word burnt out is never appropriate. So I think that's the answer to it. Let me give you 2 other things that helped us. We had a more heterogeneous population of kids than some of the most difficult schools in America have. We did pass, what was that bill called? The Brown decision in 1954. But we have more segregated schools, certainly in the North, than we had when Brown was passed. And segregated schools that are more single socioeconomic class. In other words, if it's an all-black school, it doesn't tend to have black middle-class kids and black poor kids. We have schools where they're not only poor, meaning free lunch, but they're poor. They're not just around the borderline. they're kids whose lives are full of crises and traumas. And we had such kids, but it wasn't 90%. And we had 20% of the kids in our schools were usually white. Well, the school was not located in a white area. We thought that was good, and also some of our teachers who were white sent their kids to our schools. And we had probably a third of the kids who were solidly middle class. And now, there's two ways it helps. One, it just, there are fewer crises. And second of all, there are a slightly larger percentage of parents who don't start off distrusting you. And they don't start off trusting. There's a larger number of parents who start off trusting you than in the average low-income African-American school. And that takes a lot of time to build the trust that's necessary with parents. And the third thing is that they tend to have had better educations before they got to school, or in their previous school, if it's a high school. And so they already know how to do some of the things, and that means that they're models for other kids if you don't set it up wrong. If you set it up right, they're models. You can also set it up so that they're victims, the smart aleck. But you can also set it up so that their knowledge is useful to others. And that's part of the principle of the education, that the purpose of knowledge is to make it useful. It's not just to store and treasure and show off with. Knowledge is only useful if it's useful. And for that it helps to have a span of ages too. We kept kids with the same teacher in the elementary school for 2 years. There's two ways to do that: looping or multi-age classes, so that we had more of an opportunity to get to know their families and to have build a trusting community. Because by May of the year, I finally figured this family out and this kid out, but he's about to leave me, so what's the point of it? But if I'm going to have this kid all next year and the same mother all next year, it's worth keeping at it, having another conference with the family, thinking about the summer vacation. So, yes, there was another hand back there. No, right? No. The trouble is, before King died, he focused more than he had earlier on both the war and jobs and the economy. And the last two big demonstrations he had, including the one that he died at, had to do with jobs. And what's troubling to me is that in some ways we've gone backwards. In some ways we've gone forwards. But it's an odd mix. There is a greater inequality between the top of American society and the bottom than there was in 1954, than there was when I was born, and there was in 1900. I was just reading some data about the differential between the rich in the 1890s and the poor, and I thought, I worked it out mathematically, and I realized it's worse today, not better today. And it had once been better. So there was a feeling at one time in the civil rights movement that if we could eliminate even superficial legal segregation, that economic opportunities would, as well as a better education, would together overcome racism. And I think for about 10 years that did happen. And if you look even at test scores, which I don't hold much store by, in fact, that was a short period in which they did rise, and that was that period. And since then, the economic inequalities, both on race and including racial and economic inequalities, have gotten worse and worse. The odds of being unemployed if you're a 20-year-old graduate of high school in the black community are getting more and more remote. And yet we have this huge, this huge campaign to tell all these kids that if you just got a high school education and a college degree, all will be well. And I think they're smart enough to know that isn't true. They just have to look around their own community and see how many people who have high school diplomas and have college diplomas are still unemployed. And if everybody got a PhD tomorrow and deserved it, do we have enough jobs for all those PhDs? So I think we have oversold schooling and forgotten what the surround does to people. Yes? Of course, if they had stayed in their neighborhood schools, those kids, they would have been segregated off into honors classes, too. But you're right, those are all very selective schools, and they're overwhelmingly all white schools, white and Asian. And they're not necessarily good. You know, if 100% of the kids who got into your schools had very, very, very high test scores, and the only way we have to judge whether you got a good education is very high test scores, then they can't fail. I mean, they could do nothing. Just have you walk in and out every day, and you would keep getting probably high test scores. At least my son did. I don't think he ever wrote a paper longer than 2 pages for Stuyvesant. And he never knew a single faculty member. Now, there were kids, because just as there are special kids in every school who get the attention of the faculty. The worst kids in the school are driving everyone crazy, and the superstars who are on the debate team, who are on everything, and reporters for the newspaper, and the honors classes, and the AP classes. And that happens at these places like Stuyvesant. It's a great place for those kids who shine there. My son learned to play Frisbee while he was there, and his Frisbee friends are still, he's now 52 years old, and they're still his best friends. And he just had his, 50 years old, he just had his 50th birthday party, and there was the old Stuyvesant Frisbee gang. This is not Frisbee competitive, this is freestyle. And I tell you, he spent more time in school hours in Central Park playing Frisbee than he did at Stuyvesant, and nevertheless, he passed all his courses because it's a school based on test scores to get in and on test scores to get out. So that's a pet peeve. They get enormous advantages but by being there, but I don't think, and they get listed on the top schools because they get more kids into Harvard, but actually, for many of us, it would have been better if they had been in good schools like mine. I never started a school in time for my own children. Great loss. So they never knew what in the world I was talking about how school is wonderful, exciting, interesting. I mean, they would just laugh because that wasn't what they experienced. Yes? Yeah. said, well, we should start by lying on the ground, starlit night, where you can see all the stars. That's where science education starts. And I think by that he meant wonder. It starts with amazement and wonder and puzzlement. And I've had kids who came to Riall Elementary School, and there was a kid who was coming to the school and he wanted to know more about it. And he said, you do science? And I said, oh, we do a lot of science. And he said, oh, I don't like science. And I said, you don't like science? You don't like having animals and planting and building and constructing and looking through microscopes and blah, blah. And he said, that's not science. And I said, well, what's science? He said, you read this book, you know, and then at the end of each chapter, there are questions. That's science. And so I think science is keeping alive a great wonder about the world, and then figuring it out over and over again. You don't have aha moments. That's the sad discovery in my life, at least, that there are very few ahas in science. Or you may think there's an aha, and then an hour later, you think, what was that? So I spent a summer at a wonderful science workshop given by a quite famous physicist in Colorado, and it was about gravity. I can't even remember the words anymore. And I spent 6 weeks there. At the end of 6 weeks, I thought, I get this. I really get this. And I got in my car to drive back east, and I think it was 273 miles, and I forgot it. I held on to it for a few more miles, but you have to live it for a while. The aha has to be followed by building in this new way of seeing the world. Because at its best, science changes the way things look. That's true of education in general. The world looks different. I'm reading Wuthering Heights recently, and I think it was a different book when I was a child. Who rewrote this? But I loved it then, and actually I don't love it quite as much now. But it changed my life then, and it has an effect on my life. That is, everything that grabs us changes the way we look at things. I was on a sailboat a few years ago with a friend out in the Long Island Sound, and there was the sun coming right down to me, back of the boat. And I said to my friend who was in the front of the sailboat, why is the sun coming right to me? And he said, well, it's coming to me too. I said, no, I mean, there's a path from the sun across the water to me. And he said, yes. And there's a path from the sun to me. And I said, it can't be. I look over there. I don't see any sunlight going to you. Well, have you had that experience? Do you think you could explain it? Probably you could. I still have trouble with it. I have studied that over and over again. And each time I have to go through it again, to refigure it out, what the sun is doing. Every time I go for a swim in my pond, I relearn that over again, but my first reaction is always amazement that it's coming. That this whole wide world, the sun is coming to me. I think it's important. I don't think there's, because of jobs. I don't think that's why it's important. And some people will get jobs. You know, there are more jobs in New York City for people with an art background than with a physics background. But art is an elective, which at most you take once a week. And science is a major, which you take 4 or 5 days a week. It's quite aside from everything else that I love about art. Just strictly from an art viewpoint, New York City has got more jobs for people who know how to draw well than people who are PhDs in physics. Yes? Yes? Can you translate that? differentiate. Well, let me go back to my kindergarten. You can see how a brilliant child and a child with a different way of looking at the world, I don't know what to call all these things even anymore, will be fascinated in that room. And in fact, as I was telling you before about my grandsons who, when they were 19 and 21, came up to the country to go up to be with each other for a weekend, cousins. And they went upstairs to where all the children's games were that they played with in my house, and came down indignantly to say, "Where is the farm set?" And I said, "You mean those little pigs and cows and all those plastic things?" They said, "Yes." And I said, I brought that to school years ago. "What do you want?" They said, we've been planning this for weeks now to come up to your house and play with the farm set. Now, they're really very nice, mature young men. One's about to graduate at the University of Michigan. I mean, but that, I had to go out with them to Great Barrington to buy a farm set. Now, I don't know what they did upstairs, but a good kindergarten class is good at any age. You can't help but go in and find yourself 2 hours later still engaged, and have someone has to drag you out. Why can't that be true for 12-year-olds or 16-year-olds? Why have we accepted the idea that children, when they get, but now we don't even accept it in kindergarten. There is no kindergarten left in America, practically, of the type I'm describing, in the public sector at least. But why do we think, and maybe we don't anymore think, that children will be fascinated by sand and water, but we don't need fascinating things to fascinate us at every age, in different ways. But the answer, in my opinion, is that you can create environments, discussions, projects that engage all the differential stuff that we talk about. Now, there are moments where you have to pull something aside, pull one child aside, because you can see that there's a very discrete misunderstanding here. They haven't noticed the difference. They don't, there's a printed A, and there's the A we usually make. Do you know what I mean? If you look in your book you're reading, they make the A in a way we never write it, right? I never see schools teaching kids that. Somehow, 99 out of 100 kids figures that out. But there's that 1 out of 100 who didn't. And if you're a good, thoughtful, observing teacher, you say that a kid, actually, that's just another way of writing the A. So it's noticing, observing, listening, and trying things out that is the key to working with kids who are different. And having a large enough repertoire so that you have things to draw upon that might help. You have some guesses, smart guesses in your mind about what may be confusing. And when I get to California every time, my son helps me reorient to north, south, west, and east. Because I imagine if you look out in the Pacific Ocean, you're looking west. But where he lives in Santa Cruz, when you look out of the ocean, you're looking south. And I'm not so good at geography, so each time we get out there, he reorients me about where the Pacific Ocean is. And why it is that San Jose is not east of Santa Cruz, but north of it. I have to go through that each time. And he takes me aside and helps me go through. Yes, but that's why experience is so wonderful. Because it's, you look at a kid sometimes and you say, he reminds me so much of how Tony handled that. But he reminds me of sand. Now, of course, he's not sand. But something in the way he handled that struck a bell. And because I have now had many SAMs, I don't have to do trial and error from the beginning to the end. I can move in much faster, which is one reason this new idea that teachers should come and go fast, that they're sort of like Peace Corps workers who will go to India and in 2 years solve the problems of India. You know, we didn't even have such grandiose notions about Peace Corps. People didn't go to the Peace Corps and really think they were going to solve Kenya's problems. Did they? Pardon? But but a lot of people who go into things like Teach for America today assume if I put in 3 hard years, since I'm a smart person, graduated from a good college, that kids are lucky to have had me for a few years. That's one of the latest ideas that I think is damaging to being able to do all these things I'm describing. Nobody has asked me about tests. How many of you, raise your hand, how many of you think of yourself as very sort of naturally good at tests, at standardized tests? Bubble type. They come easily to you. You do? Raise your hand a little higher. Oh, maybe I should ask the other way around. How many of you think that you're smarter than you seem to be when you take standardized tests? So you're right. I guarantee you're right. Standardized, I got interested in standardized tests for a very peculiar reason. And that was that my 3rd grade son, one now teaching in the West Coast, a teacher called me to say that he needed remedial reading help because he'd done terribly on the test. And he was new to New York at the time, and I said, Nicholas, my son? No, you must have looked at something else. I said, he's the only one of my children who, at the age of 4, became a fluent reader without anyone. I don't know how it happened. And he stays up all night reading books. I mean, no, reading is not one of his problems. And she got very indignant about it. She would have to talk to me because if I refused remedial reading, she was taking no responsibility for his literacy development. So I said, let's meet. I had just broken my leg, and she said, well, come up on the 4th floor and meet me, and I said, I can't come. Anyway, we had a big thing, and the principal finally arranged a meeting, and I couldn't convince her. I said, have you read with him? And she said, no, he's too shy to read. Or he doesn't know how, I don't know which. And I said, so I went home to my son, and by this time I was starting to teach about a month later, and I got a copy of in the closet somewhere of a test, and for 3rd graders, and I brought it home and said to him, I want to see how you do on this test. So first there was a paragraph ones, questions. So he read the paragraph and he put his hand over it and he started, and I said, answering the questions. And I said, why are you putting the hand over the paragraph? And he said, because that would be cheating if you could look back. Of course you could get them all right that way. And I said, the purpose of this test is to get them all right. So why do you object to getting them all right? Did someone tell you you couldn't look back? No, but I think that's cheating. Now you have to understand, this is a son who had his own moral code about everything. So this wasn't the first such struggle. But over the next 5 or 6 months, I convinced him that, I know what he then said to me. When I said, because the machine that scores this doesn't know why you gave this answer. This was to the mother. He said, I know they want me to give this answer, but I think this one's right. And I said, so which one do you choose? He said, the right one, the one I think is right. And I said, yeah, but the scorer doesn't know what your reasoning is. So the scorer just will mark it wrong. And he said, oh no, I leave a little note explaining. And I said, the scorer doesn't read. What do you mean the scorer doesn't read? I said, it's a machine that doesn't know how to read that scores your test. And then he was indignant about that, that he should be scored by someone who can't even read. But anyway, at the end of 5 or 6 months, I did convince him. And when he did well in the test in the spring, that same teacher took credit for having and I let it pass. But she did write in his record card, "Mother, a troublemaker," which I didn't know about till he went to junior high school. And my friend was the principal of junior high school, and he called me in one day and he said, "I just thought you might like to see what's written here." And he said, I said, well, that explains why his 4th, 5th, and 6th grade teachers didn't seem to want to have much to do with it. So he blanked it out. Tests, simply, there's enormous number of reasons why people get the wrong answer on tests, besides the fact that they're ignorant or stupid. It's a very poor instrument, even if it was measuring all the things worth measuring, which of course tests don't. But as a type, as a technique, as a tool, psychometrics has its limitations. The science of testing has its limitations. And it's based on some, if you want, stereotypes about what's the right answer. If I asked you what's the opposite, well, in elementary school tests they used to have opposites. That was a big thing, opposites. I don't know if they still have opposites. But when they had opposites, we taught opposites. So what's the opposite of day? What's the opposite of chair? Doesn't have an opposite, right? Now, it's a complicated. Why doesn't chair have an opposite but night does? What words have opposite which don't? And when you start playing with it, unless you have sort of been grown up among those opposites in the nursery rhymes you read, and all these things, the fact of the matter, you can read every single one of those words and know what they mean. And it's a vocabulary test with the opposites, and get the wrong answer because you're confused about this opposite idea, which is not an easy idea for a 1st, 2nd, or 3rd grade. It's a very complicated idea, and you might try it out on yourself. What is the difference between saying the opposite of a chair is a sofa and the opposite of day is night? Could there be an opposite of chair? What is there in the nature of chair that can't be an opposite of chair? Table, what's the opposite of table? That chair? Maybe. It's true those two words are often put together, right? So I think a lot of kids would say table, because table and chair is a phrase that we recognize. Ham and cheese is a phrase we recognize. Is the opposite of ham cheese? Why not? Anyway, I'm just saying we don't know what we're getting at. And but what's the good news, I think, is the amount of evidence that's compiling that spending most of your time preparing children for standardized tests does not improve your score in standardized tests. Now, if you're not sure of that, get some of your faculty to point you to the literature. This is stunning to me, but very cheering, because I think to myself, if I was teaching today, or if I meet a teacher, I can honestly say, do a good job teaching, because that is just as likely to improve the test scores as spending your time prepping. And at least they will have learned something other than testing. I have that one son who is terrible at taking tests. He still is not good at it. He still slows him down because he knows that his first reactions are not the right one. His brother whizzes through tests. That's why he got through Stuyvesant while playing Frisbee, because his instinctive reactions are the right ones. And he just whizzes through it. I don't understand. He, in fact, enjoys taking standardized tests so much that he sometimes will take a test just because he's heard that somebody is giving a test on something, and he thinks, well, that'd be fun. And it restores his self-esteem for a moment. But I don't, it's a magic of a sort. And it allowed him to more easily get a bad education in Stuyvesant because he was good at testing. So you may have an advantage if you're not naturally good. You might actually get to be educated. giving 100 little lectures here. Anyone here want to be a kindergarten teacher? Shocking. Did someone put their hand up? It is the best grade to teach, even today, because, what? Oh, who wants to be a kindergarten teacher, I said. Oh, I didn't, yeah, is anybody hearing me back there? Are you having trouble hearing me? Why didn't you say something? I'll start all over. Now that's another thing you need to teach kids to do. Not sit passively when they can't hear the speaker. They should get up and say, I can't hear you. Just as citizens should stand up and say, you can't do that. You can't. Does it help if this mic is closer to me? I wonder what it's like to teach Head Start. I once taught Head Start. The first year was introduced in 1966 or something in Philadelphia. And it was an amazing experience because I was surprised that 5-year-olds were so interesting. Now I discovered 3- and 4-year-olds were also. But they had a training session every Friday because this was a new program, and we would, the kids would come to us Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday we'd go to this big auditorium, and the head of the Head Start would be up on the stage, and for 5 hours she taught us children's rhymes. What's it? The spider goes up the swamp. Supposed to know that. Anyway, and little songs, and she played the piano for us, and then gave us some instructions about how to take attendance. And I thought, we have accepted as teachers a way of being treated. I mean, we should have gotten up, all of us, and walked out of that room. The notion that the only thing we needed to learn about to work with 3- and 4-year-olds was how to sing cute songs to them. Why did we sit there? Friday after Friday, when there were so many, we could have visited families' homes, we could have sat down with smaller groups of kids, a billion things. We could have gotten together with each other to talk about what was going on in our schools. I was in the basement of a church in Germantown. I would have loved to find out more from what other people were having experience. We didn't have enough kids in the beginning. And so they had like 5 kids in my class, and there was me and a wonderful assistant. And when I said, couldn't one of us maybe take care of all 5 kids, and the other one could go out and try to recruit? And they said, no, because your job description doesn't have anything to do with recruiting. And so I didn't ask the second time. We just traded off. My sister and I, we taught one day, and then the other day we went out recruiting until we got a proper number of kids. Why, however, haven't we learned, and is it true of all professions, that people don't, when they hear nonsense and they know this is stupid and silly, that they sit there? So I was thinking that about you. You're sitting here, and some of you didn't hear a word I said. Should have gotten up and walked out. Was it almost time for them to walk out? Any other, why do we do that? Are we being polite? Why? Okay. Okay. Oh, okay. Okay, thank you. Well, I think the faculty has to play a more prominent political writing job too. They have to go out to the school districts around here and try to educate. they have to try to educate in a way that seems like they're joining with them. Because the head of early childhood in New York City agreed with me that what was going on in early childhood was disgraceful. But she had her orders. I was already retired by that time. I was living upstate, and I thought that was a mistake. I should have shadowed her for a while. We should have gone around visiting so that we could have talked together about how she could cheat. And what they wouldn't notice, and then who she could bring in to speak that would help buttress her position. And so we need to join forces with each other too. I have a friend teaching who's heads a school in, I think it's called Middletown, Ohio. It's a wonderful, wonderful school, and she's in a lot of trouble in her district because it's so wonderful. But the university down of Ohio, Miami University, loves her. It loves her school and sends student teachers there. And I went to speak to them, and I said, you've got to do something to help Diane. She's afraid she's going to get fired, and they're going to put someone else in her place. You have to figure out, with her advice, a campaign by Miami University to buttress her position so they don't dare do that to her. And I think we have to be more political. I'm not talking for the moment about voting for Eldridge versus whoever. I'm talking about politically figure out how we can support what we know is right for kids, and which is being dictated by people who know nothing about kids. They don't pretend to. The mayor of New York and Joel Klein, they possibly have had children, but that's the absolute most they know about children. And, but they are making policy about children. And that's true for Duncan. He says he was a tutor in his mother's after-school program. People say that to me like, no, Duncan really knows about education. His mother ran a daycare, an after-school program, and he used to go over there and help the kids. And I think, what? No wonder they treat us so disrespectfully. They think that's the knowledge level we have, what he was able to pick up at 18 years old by helping his mother after school. There is such basic contempt for our knowledge, and I think we have to fight that back, and I think we need the university, not just the education department of the university. You got to find some allies in the science department. I know a lot of good science people who say, we're not teaching science in schools, we're teaching test prep. That's not what this country lacks in scientific education. And we have to figure out who key allies could be in every community so that we make it easier for our students to practice what we're preaching. Got to set up our own centers so they have an opportunity. There has to be places they can see it work. And just remind me, I have a film at home, a 35-minute film at home about a second and third grade classroom that I love to show because it's some things you have to see to believe. You have to have been there to believe it. And I think it's harder and harder to be, even I, with all my experience, there are moments when I see one of those programs that's guaranteed to bring you high test scores and fluent readers by 7. I'm tempted. Maybe they're right. So how can I expect all of you to think I'm right when even I sometimes doubt myself? So be there for each other. Look, when you go to schools, form your own little study groups. Find the teacher an experienced teacher who shares, at least on some level, your worries. Find networks that keep you able to stand up, and then this faculty here has to be the fallback place while you're a student teacher and when you become a teacher. That you give them the courage, and they give you the courage to keep doing it. Teaching is a courageous. Kids deserve our courage. Yeah, that's a nice final way to end. So I thank you all. And you're all still invited tonight to hear me say all of this in a totally different way.